That white dust on your squash leaves, that gray film creeping across your roses, you've seen it. You've watched a healthy plant turn pale and powdery, like somebody sprinkled flour over the whole thing overnight. And you probably drove to the store and paid good money for a bottle of fungicide with a name you couldn't pronounce. Here's what nobody at that store will tell you. The box of baking soda sitting in your refrigerator right now does the same job for pennies. We've used it on our plants for generations. The plain people never needed the fancy bottle because we already had the answer in the pantry. Stay with me, because right around the middle of this, I'll show you the exact mixture that turns a dying rose bush around in a week for less than the price of a cup of coffee, the way my grandfather did it in his garden. Before we go further, do me a favor and tell me in the comments what state you're growing in and which plant has that white dust on it right now. Squash, roses, cucumbers, grapes. Drop it below so I know who I'm talking to. I grew up in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, in a house with no electricity and a garden that had to feed a family through a long winter. When you can't run to the store for everything, you learn to look twice at the things you already have. I remember standing in my grandfather's squash patch on a July morning, the dew still heavy, watching him mix a spoonful of white powder into a pail of water. I thought it was flour. He told me it was the same soda my grandmother used for her bread. And he walked those rows with an old brush, flicking that milky water up under the leaves where the mildew liked to hide. I didn't understand it then. I understand it now. And what I've learned since, digging into what the outside world's own scientists finally proved, is that my grandfather was right about every bit of it. Let me tell you why that white dust shows up in the first place. Because once you understand it, you'll never look at your garden the same way. That powdery mildew isn't dirt, it isn't flour. It's a living thing, a fungus, and it's alive right there on the surface of the leaf. It sends down tiny roots, thinner than a hair, and it drinks the sugar out of your plant. That's why the leaf goes pale. That's why it curls and dies. The plant is being robbed, slowly, one leaf at a time, and by the time you notice the white patches, that fungus has already been feeding for days. Now here's the part the plain people understood without ever needing a microscope. That fungus is fussy about where it lives. It wants the surface of the leaf to be just slightly acidic, just a little sour, the way most leaves naturally are. That's its comfort. That's its home. And baking soda, plain old sodium bicarbonate, is the opposite of sour. It's alkaline. When you spray a thin baking soda solution over that leaf, you change the whole neighborhood. You raise the pH right there on the surface, up around 8, and that fungus can no longer do its business. Its little cells swell up and collapse. It can't hold its shape in that changed environment. You didn't poison it with some harsh chemical. You just made its house unlivable. That's the whole secret, and it costs almost nothing. If this way of thinking about the garden speaks to you using what you already own, solving problems the way families solved them before the store shelves got crowded, then I want to mention something I put together for folks who want to go deeper. It's called the Garden Blueprint. Old-fashioned pest cures that cost pennies. And it's part of a full collection that also includes the Harvest Blueprint, covering Amish soil and storage secrets for bigger yields. Everything in those pages comes from the same place this video comes from. Knowledge that was never lost, just quietly set aside. You can find the link down in the description, and it's less than most people spend on a single bag of store fertilizer. Now, I want to give you the mixture exact, so you can do this properly and not waste your time. You take 1 tablespoon of baking soda, not a heaping scoop, a level tablespoon, because more is not better here, and I'll tell you why in a minute. You put that into 1 gallon of water, stir it until it's fully dissolved, no grit at the bottom. Then you spray it on your plants, and here's the part most folks miss. You spray the underside of the leaves too, because that's where the fungus hides from the sun. You do this in the early morning or the cool of the evening, never in the hot middle of the day, and you repeat it every 7 to 14 days, and always after a hard rain washes it off. This is not folklore. This is not just my grandfather's hunch. Back in the 1980s, a researcher at Cornell University, a plant scientist named Dr. R. Kenneth Horst, studied this very thing on roses. Roses that get black spot and powdery mildew, the 2 plagues every rose grower fights, and he found that a baking soda spray significantly cut down both diseases. His work became so well known that gardeners today still call the recipe the Cornell formula. Think about that. The finest university in the state, my people have farmed for 300 years, spending real research dollars to confirm what my grandfather was doing with a pail and a brush before any of those scientists were born. We didn't need the study. But it's nice to have the proof. But here's where it gets more interesting, and where I have to warn you about the first mistake that ruins this for most people. Because if plain baking soda were the whole story, everyone would already know it works. So why do so many folks try it once and give up? The answer is that spray runs off. You mix your gallon, you spray your squash, and by the time you turn around, half of it has dripped onto the ground. Water beads up on a leaf. It doesn't want to stick. And a fungicide that doesn't stay put is a fungicide that doesn't work. So the person tries it, sees the mildew come back, and decides the old way is a myth. Then they go right back to the store and buy the $40 bottle. And that, friend, is exactly what the folks selling that bottle are counting on. They're not worried about your baking soda. They know most people will use it wrong and quit. Here's the fix, and it's the difference between a spray that slides off and a spray that clings all day. You add one thing that makes the water wetter, so it spreads flat across the leaf instead of beating up. In the old days, my grandfather used a sliver of my grandmother's lye soap, shaved thin and dissolved in the pail. Today, you can use a few drops, no more than half a teaspoon, of plain liquid dish soap in your gallon. That soap breaks the surface tension of the water. Suddenly, your baking soda solution spreads out into a thin, even film that coats the whole leaf and stays there. It's the difference between rain rolling off a waxed hood and water soaking into a cotton shirt. Now, Dr. Horst at Cornell found something even better, and this is the part I want you to write down. Instead of soap, he used a light horticultural oil, a fine spray oil, mixed right in with the baking soda, and that oil did two things at once. It made the mixture stick like the soap did, but it also smothered the fungus that was already there. So the baking soda changed the pH and stopped new fungus from growing, and the oil coated and killed the fungus already feeding on the leaf. Prevention and cure in 1 gallon. The recipe was 1 tablespoon of baking soda, a tablespoon or so of that light oil, and a gallon of water. That combination outperformed the baking soda alone by a wide margin. And every ingredient in it costs less than your morning coffee. I told you I'd warn you about using too much, so let me pay that off now, because this is the mistake that scares people away from the method for good. Baking soda has sodium in it. Sodium is salt. And salt, we all know, is death to plants in any real amount. If you make your mixture too strong, thinking a stronger dose will work faster, you can burn the very leaves you're trying to save. You'll see brown, scorched edges, yellow spots, so you keep it to that 1 level tablespoon per gallon. You never spray a plant that's already wilting from drought, because a thirsty plant can't handle it. And you don't drench the same soil with it week after week for months, because that sodium can build up in the ground. Used right, in the small amounts, I'm telling you, it's gentle. Used heavy-handed, it's harsh. My grandfather always said the difference between medicine and poison is the measure of the spoon. He was talking about the garden, but it's true of most things. So now you've got the mildew handled, but if you're anything like the folks I talk to, a question is already forming in your mind. If this one cheap powder can do all that, what else were we sold that we never needed? Because I promise you, powdery mildew is just the beginning. Let me tell you about your soil, because this is where I lose people to disbelief, and then I win them right back. You know how the garden centers sell you those little pH testing kits? The plastic probes, the color strips, the digital meters that cost $20, $30, $40 and give you a different answer every time you stick them in the dirt? My people never bought a single one. We tested our soil with 2 things from the kitchen, and one of them is the baking soda we've been talking about. Here's how you do it, and you can do this today, this afternoon, with nothing but what's in your cupboard. You take 2 little samples of your garden soil in 2 separate cups. Into the first cup, you pour a little white vinegar. If it fizzes and bubbles, your soil is alkaline, it's sweet, it's on the high end of the pH scale. The vinegar is an acid reacting against the lime in your soil. Now the second cup, you add a little distilled water to make mud, and then you sprinkle in a spoonful of baking soda. If that one fizzes, your soil is acidic, it's sour on the low end, because now the baking soda, which is a base, is reacting against the acid in your dirt. If neither cup does much of anything, your soil is close to neutral, right in the middle, which is where most vegetables want to be. That's it. That's a soil test the outside world pays good money for, done in 5 minutes with a box of soda and a jug of vinegar you already own. It won't give you a precise number down to the decimal, I'll be honest with you about that. But it tells you the one thing that matters most, which direction your soil is leaning, sweet or sour. And knowing that direction is 90% of the battle, because it tells you what your plants are struggling to eat. See, this is the thing nobody explains. When your soil is too sour or too sweet, the plant can't take up its food, even if the food is right there in the dirt. The roots can't grab the iron, the phosphorus, the nitrogen, because the chemistry of the soil locks it up. That's why your tomatoes look starved even after you fed them. It was never about adding more. It was about the soil being in the right range so the plant could actually eat what was already there. My grandfather knew a sour soil grew a poor crop. He didn't have the word pH. He didn't need it. He had the vinegar and the soda, and he had eyes. Now, here's where I feel a certain kind of anger, and I don't use that word lightly because we're a peaceful people. An entire industry has been built on keeping you from knowing these simple things. Think about what's really going on. Every dollar you spend on a fancy fungicide, a plastic pH meter, a specialty soil sweetener, is a dollar that depends on you not knowing that the kitchen already had the answer. They don't lie to you exactly. They just never mention the cheap way. And why would they? There's no profit in telling a man he already owns what he needs. My people lived 100 years without any of these products, and our gardens fed whole families through the winter. That's not a story. That's just how it was. The knowledge didn't disappear because it stopped working. It disappeared because nobody could make money reminding you of it. Now, I know what some of you are thinking right about now. You're thinking, this all sounds fine for a man starting a fresh garden, but I've had my beds for 20 years. My roses are established. My soil is what it is. Does any of this help me? And I want to speak directly to you for a minute because you're exactly the person my grandfather would have wanted me to talk to. The truth is, an old, established garden is where these methods shine the brightest, not the weakest. Here's why. A young plant you can baby along, but an old rose bush, a mature grapevine, a squash patch you've grown in the same corner for a decade, those plants have history in that soil. And that same spot, year after year, is exactly where the mildew spores overwinter, hiding in the fallen leaves and the top crust of the dirt, waiting for spring. Fresh gardens don't have that built-up problem yet. Yours does. So the cheap fixes matter more to you, not less. Here's what you can do this very weekend on the garden you already have, with nothing you don't already own. First, before you even mix a spray, get down and clean the ground under your affected plants. Rake up every fallen, spotted leaf from under those roses and squash, because that's the nursery where next year's disease is sleeping. Don't compost those diseased leaves. Get them away from the bed. Just that one chore, done this weekend, breaks the cycle that's been coming back to haunt you every single summer. Then mix your gallon, 1 level tablespoon of baking soda, a half teaspoon of dish soap, or a spoon of light oil, and give those established plants a thorough coat, tops and undersides, in the cool morning. You're not replanting anything. You're not digging anything up. You're treating the mature plants you already love, and you'll see the new growth come in clean while the old white patches stop spreading. And here's a bonus for the folks with old brick paths, stone walkways, and cracked concrete, the kind of features an established property always has. You know those weeds that come up in the cracks, the ones you can never pull for good? Pour dry baking soda straight into the cracks, right onto the weeds, a good heavy line of it, and sweep it down into the gaps. That concentrated dose of sodium, right in that narrow crack where it won't reach your good plants, makes the soil too salty for the weeds to survive. My people kept the walkways to the barn clean this way long before anybody sold a jug of weed killer with a warning label the size of a newspaper. You do it a couple times through the season, especially before a dry stretch, and those cracks stay bare. That's an old, established yard problem solved with the same box. So whether your garden is 1 year old or 40, you're covered. But I promised you something at the start, and I keep my word. I told you about a mixture that turns a dying rose bush around in a week. And I've been holding back the best of it, the part that ties it all together, because I want you to have it fresh in your mind when you walk out to your garden. Before I give you that, let me tell you about the tomatoes, because this one surprises even people who've gardened their whole lives. There's an old saying among growers that you can sweeten your tomatoes with baking soda, and most modern folks laugh it off as a wives' tale, but there's real truth buried in it, and here's the honest version, because I won't sell you a fairy story. Tomatoes taste like a balance of sugar and acid. When your soil is very sour, very acidic, the fruit can come out sharp and tart, almost sour itself. Now, if you sprinkle a light dusting of baking soda on the soil around the base of your tomato plants, just a small amount worked gently into the top of the dirt and watered in, you nudge that soil a little less acidic right there in the root zone. And a tomato grown in soil that isn't so sour can taste noticeably milder, rounder, sweeter on the tongue. It's not magic sugar, it's chemistry. You're not adding sweetness. You're taking away some of the sourness that was masking the sweetness the fruit already had. The key word again is light, a small dusting, a few times through the season, worked into the top inch, not a pile against the stem. My grandmother did this to the plants closest to the kitchen door, the ones she picked for slicing, and I can still taste the difference between those and the ones out in the field. Now, the finale. The thing I've been saving. Everything I've told you so far treats the disease once it's already there. But the real secret, the one the plain people understood and the outside world forgot, is that baking soda works far better as a shield than as a sword. It's a preventer, not just a curer. And that changes everything about how you use it. Here's what the research actually shows, and here's the piece almost nobody applies. That baking soda spray raises the pH on the leaf surface. We covered that. But that protective alkaline film only lasts so long before rain and dew and time wash it away. So folks, spray it once when they finally notice the white patches, when the fungus is already dug in and feeding, and they wonder why it's a struggle. They're using a shield as a bandage. The secret is to put the shield up before the enemy ever arrives. Think about your own garden. You know, from years of watching, exactly when the mildew comes. It comes in the muggy end of summer, when the days are warm and the nights turn cool, and the dew sits heavy on the leaves till mid-morning. Powdery mildew loves that. It doesn't even need the leaves to be wet. It thrives in that humid, still air. So here is the recovered knowledge, the way my grandfather actually worked, that I want you to carry out of here. You start spraying that thin baking soda solution on your most vulnerable plants, your squash, your cucumbers, your roses, your grapes, 2 full weeks before you'd normally expect the first white spot. You coat those leaves while they're still perfectly green and healthy. You lay the shield down on clean ground, and you keep it fresh once a week and after every rain. When you do that, the fungus spore lands on a leaf that's already alkaline, already hostile, already an unlivable house, and it can never get its roots down in the first place. It dies before it ever feeds. You don't fight the mildew, you make sure it never begins. And a rose bush that never gets sick in the first place stays lush and green and blooming right through the season that used to leave it gray and half dead by August. That's the bush that turns around in a week, because you catch it at the very first hint and the fungus has nothing established to defend. Here's the part that makes it feel like a secret handed down instead of a tip off a bottle. The commercial world eventually figured out that this pH trick was too good to ignore. So they took the very same idea, changed one ingredient to a close cousin of baking soda called potassium bicarbonate, put it in a bag, gave it a brand name, and now they sell it to greenhouse growers as a registered fungicide for real money. Same principle exactly. Change the pH on the leaf, make the surface unlivable for the fungus. They didn't invent a thing. They repackaged what was in my grandmother's baking cupboard and what my grandfather sprayed with a brush and sold it back to the world at a markup. The potassium version has one advantage. It feeds the plant a little potassium instead of adding sodium, so serious growers who spray all season long lean on it. But for the home gardener treating a few bushes and beds through one summer, the box of baking soda in your kitchen does the very same job. You've had the patented secret in your pantry the whole time. They just never had a reason to tell you. So let me put the whole method in your hands, clean and simple, the way I'd tell a neighbor over the fence. You mix 1 level tablespoon of baking soda into 1 gallon of water. You add a half teaspoon of plain dish soap or a spoonful of light horticultural oil so it clings to the leaf instead of running off. You spray it in the cool of the morning, tops and undersides of the leaves, starting 2 weeks before mildew season and repeating every 7 days and after each rain. You keep the mixture weak so you never burn a leaf and you never spray a plant that's wilting from thirst. For your soil, you test it free with vinegar in one cup and baking soda in another, and you learn which way your dirt leans before you spend $1 on anything. For your tomatoes closest to the kitchen, a light dusting worked into the top of the soil takes the sour edge off the fruit. And for the weeds in your walkway, cracks, dry soda swept right down into the gaps keeps them bare. That's a whole season of garden care, disease, soil, flavor, and weeds from one box that costs about $1. I think about my grandfather in that squash patch, the dew on his boots, the pail in his hand, and I realize he wasn't being cheap and he wasn't being clever. He was being faithful with what he'd been given. He'd have thought it was almost sinful to drive to a store and pay $40 for a jug of something to do what a spoonful of soda already did, and to throw the plastic bottle in the trash after. Waste wasn't in him. It wasn't in any of them. The good Lord provided the answer plain and cheap, and the plain people just never stopped using it while the rest of the world got talked into forgetting. That's really what this comes down to. It was never that these products don't work. Some of them work fine. It's that you were quietly convinced, year after year, purchase after purchase, that you couldn't grow a healthy garden without a shelf full of things your grandparents never owned. You were made to feel dependent on the very thing you could always do yourself. And every time you mix that gallon this summer and watch your roses stay green, you're taking a little of that back. You're the kind of person who refuses to keep overpaying for what nature and the old ways already handed you for free. That's not being cheap. That's being wise. That's stewardship, the way I was raised to understand it. So here's what I'd ask of you. Go back to the comment I mentioned at the start and tell me the state you're growing in and which plant has that white dust on it right now. Squash, roses, cucumbers, or grapes. I read them and it helps me know what to cover next. Don't just think it, take a second and actually type it out below, because somebody else with the very same plant and the very same trouble is going to scroll down and find your comment and be helped by it. That's how this works. That's how the knowledge gets passed along the way it always was, neighbor to neighbor. And if you want to keep recovering the things the plain people never lost, the cheap and simple ways that fed families for generations before the store shelves filled up, come along with us. This isn't about following a channel. It's about a group of folks who've decided they're done being sold their own good sense back to them. Next time, I'm going to show you the one common kitchen scrap most people throw straight in the trash that my grandmother buried at the base of every rose bush she owned, and why those bushes outbloomed every other garden in the county. You already own it. You've been throwing it away your whole life. I'll show you exactly how to use it. Until then, go easy, be faithful with what you've got, and don't let anybody sell you what the good Lord already put in your pantry. I showed you the baking soda today, but that's just one cure. Inside the Amish Field Circle, I share the deeper version, the old-fashioned pest cures. Picking up right where we stopped here. You can ask me your own question, and a real person, me, answers you myself, and you'll belong among thousands of old ways growers just like you. Just point your phone's camera at the code on screen. Cancel anytime, one click. If this helped you in your garden, why not subscribe and stay with me? I have plenty more simple tips like this waiting for you right here whenever you're ready.